we are talking Redhead, and this is directed, written, edited, produced by the husband and wife team of Sam and Johnna Hodge. Johnna Hodge actually stars as our main character, Autumn, also known as the Redhead, and Sam Hodge has a small role as well. So how to describe this movie? It's a low-budget, grimy grindhouse movie. It could almost be called the hashtag #MeToo Massacre, I would say, to give you kind of a broad idea about where this film is going. I would say it actually kind of is kind of like a low-budget version of Death Wish meets Joker in some ways as well. Now, the focus of this movie is on this character called Autumn, played by Johnna Hodge. And at the beginning of the movie, we see that she is being held captive by a depraved serial killer who has killed 70-odd people, we learn. And he kills a couple of people on screen whilst Autumn is being held hostage. But she manages to escape and kill her captor. So she's clearly traumatised from this kind of experience. And then she ultimately kind of goes down a dark path herself, seemingly to have a kind of like this mental breakdown on screen and reacting very violently to the many men who end up kind of trying to sleaze on her and various other kind of things as well. So she becomes kind of like a serial killer herself, targeting specifically kind of men ultimately. Now, what will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works with Redhead. Again, this is a low-budget movie. Apparently, it took around 2 years to go into from start of production to finish, and there's clearly a kind of loving kind of craft made from this kind of husband and wife team who seem to have done the vast majority of kind of the legwork behind the camera, and you know, obviously a personal project for them. So it comes across as somewhat of a labour of love, and obviously this kind of low budget it still has a quite a good production value, I would say. I actually watched this with a fellow YouTuber, Grumpy Andrew's House of Horror, and we both commented that the kind of, despite the fact this is a low budget movie, it's actually quite well produced in regards to production value and kind of like camera work, cinematography, things like this. There's some pretty nice kind of like sequences that are shot very well. The lighting is for the most part pretty good. And it's a brutal film. This has a high body count and it is bloody. Those of you who like your kind of like gory movies and kind of violent movies, brutal movies, you're going to love this movie because it's all of those things and more. As I mentioned, the movie has this kind of interesting premise. And one of the things I found, I mean, this movie has its issues story-wise, which I'll come on to, but it has somewhat of a, not exactly unique, but it's uncommon kind of setup where the movie is taking place from the point of view of our killer. It has been done a couple of times, but the interesting thing is obviously we have this kind of female killer, you know, female kind of serial killer. And we know that the reason why she's like that is because she is a survivor of a serial killer herself. So you almost get the birth of this new one. You see this kind of like this spiraling kind of mental decline that this kind of character is having. And she kind of goes on, in her mind, this kind of mission of justice, kind of righting the wrongs that she feels that these men have kind of inflicted upon her. And some of them may be particularly kind of sleazy, some of them might not be. Some of them might just be kind of seeing how she's doing, but she kind of sees it as these men are just kind of being terrible ultimately, and they have to pay the price. So she has this kind of like vigilante kind of style mindset, even though, to be fair, some of the guys are really undeserving of the fate that they are getting. She also has this kind of like Joker-esque kind of quality to it. There's a sequence where she actually kind of inspires other character to kind of do this same really. And the character of Autumn, because she's this redhead and she has this kind of pale skin, and she's kind of doing these kind of like manic expressions. She kind of looks like the Joker, especially when she's covered in kind of blood. So it really does kind of have this kind of Joker aesthetic, and because she has this kind of, she's having this mental breakdown, she has this kind of like manic energy that's kind of like quite compelling. And I will say as well, the guy who is the original serial killer that kind of put her through this, again, he has that very same kind of, I mean, it's a little bit overcooked, but this kind of same kind of manic energy that kind of makes quite a scary character, because he's so kind of like uncontrollable and unpredictable. So it kind of, the character of Autumn kind of is almost turns into the character that she escaped from, which I kind of found pretty interesting. As I say, this movie isn't afraid of a bit of violence, and there's some quite kind of like violent and brutal scenes. The movie has a kind of dark comedic tone to it as well. It is, it is kind of like a high body count and pretty gory, but it still has this kind of like vein of dark humour that kind of goes through it. That is, for example, one guy, she ends up stabbing in the testicles, ripping him out, and then kind of like stuffing him in his mouth and things like that. And it's kind of, done with kind of practical effects. And it looks a little cheap, but it's kind of like meant to be a little bit kind of tongue-in-cheek, I felt. There's a few kind of funny kind of gags and kind of funny kind of lines here and there, I would say. I actually thought the performance is a mix, and I'm going to come on to why, but I think the performances that matter are quite fun. I mean, the character of Autumn, played by Johnna Hodge, as I mentioned, she has this kind of like this manicness about her, and she's very, like, she has this kind of like very crazy expressions, and she's quite good, I think, about portraying this kind of like this crazed look in her eyes, and she's very expressive and things. I think she comes across as quite well, and it's kind of like somewhat of a hyper reality. It doesn't quite feel like it's a realistic movie necessarily, but it has this kind of dirty kind of grindhouse exploitative kind of like feel to it that I feel fans of maybe like the 70s kind of style kind of like slasher and serial killer films kind of might kind of enjoy them. And it's a very kind of simple story. Ultimately, it's really just this kind of this person going on a kind of like a crazed killing spree ultimately, but it makes for an interesting kind of like motivation. You kind of see the genesis of where she's kind of like what's made her do this, so it makes you kind of feel a degree of kind of sympathy for her. And in this time of Me Too and everything, and post Me Too, it has that kind of like that modern social political edge to it as well. The movie's not trying to be preachy. It's not trying to do that, but I think it's kind of like, because of the way the world is now, it obviously draws kind of comparisons to the guys and how they are, portrayed. Certainly, at least the majority of them in this movie. Overall, it has this kind of like entertainment value. There are some issues with it, which we'll talk about in just a second, but it is an entertaining movie if you are in the mood for a dirty, grimy, grindhouse, exploitation style B-movie flick, with kind of, like I said, that Death Wish meets Joker kind of vibe to it. What doesn't work? There's a number of things that are kind of like small things that I can pick with this movie, but I'm going to say the biggest issue for me first, and it almost has two components to it. Once the story gets going, it really doesn't have anything more to in the tank in regards to narrative. We get this set up where the character of Autumn is set on her kind of like her projected future of being a serial killer herself, but that's really all the movie has to offer. It doesn't really have any type of narrative outside of that. It's just a variety of people that she kind of comes across that she kind of like ends up killing, and that's it. That's the movie. There's no real narrative from that. So the narrative's a little kind of weak, I would say. There's a point in the movie where, and this to me is, I have to be honest with you, I was pretty enjoying the movie. There's a point in the movie where she meets her father, and there's a plot point is revealed where we learn that someone else might have been involved in her kind of abduction. Now, this presents a couple of problems for me. Number one, it just comes out of nowhere. It's not explained how this other person was kind of involved. We never see anyone else kind of getting in, involved to it. Looking at it kind of realistically, it doesn't make any sense. And then from the actual story perspective, it makes it sound like that this kind of person would be someone who's the kind of the big boss who she's kind of aiming at, and it never really transpires that it's just another person. It's just kind of another person to kind of put on the kill list. And it could have been more of a narrative thread where we see this other person's point of view or something like that, where it would have given you a little bit more in regards to narrative, because at the moment it's person after person after person, and that is it. The other thing with that scene as well, there's a scene, the scene involves her father, and it's quite again, it's a low budget movie. Probably friends and family members kind of doing the acting. The acting of that scene by the father was by far the worst in the movie. He's looking at the camera a few times, and I've got to be honest with you, his line delivery wasn't good. The way he was written wasn't good. I mean, his daughter has been kind of kidnapped, tortured, her husband has been killed, and the father just doesn't seem to kind of like really kind of seem like he really cares, or he's kind of like anything, any kind of reaction to it. He's just kind of like, and then this is where we learn that there might be someone else involved, and then the father is just like, oh, I will just leave it if I were you. I'm thinking, man, that scene was awful. That sequence of the father was an awful sequence. In every way, the way it was written, the way it was acted, and then the kind of like the lack of kind of like the story progression that it tries to set, that you feel like it could have set up. That sequence was bad. And then, like I said, there wasn't much done with the story outside of that. So that's kind of the main issue for me. The acting, there's some kind of like mixed performances, let me just say. Like I said, where it matters, I think, let's say Johnna Hodge does, she's a little overbaked, but it's fine for a kind of B movie. And there's other actors who I think do an okay job. There's one or two actors, again, very much like the kind of the father, where it's kind of quite painful a little bit. There's one other character as well who's not particularly strong, like a barman. But again, a little bit forgiving with kind of a low budget film like this. But there's, again, how seriously do you want to take a film like this? Because if you want to take a film seriously and you kind of want to watch it with, realistic kind of logic, then this is the other thing with this film, is that it has lots of instances of this kind of really just ignoring logic. Probably the biggest one is like the police. I mean, she's going on this killing spree, and the police have like seemingly, realistically they would capture like that, but she seems to evade the police no problem, and she's not really even trying. When the police do, come to speak with her, and she's a person of interest, they don't take her into the police station. They just one guy questions her at her door. There's all these kind of like little logic issues. There's kind of like when she kind of eventually kind of gets away from her original captor, she somehow has a knife in her hand. We don't see her get the knife. People are kind of like, in that first scene, people are seemingly kind of tied up, but they're not like, they're just tied up with their hands. They could easily just get up and walk away. Things like this. There's kind of like these little instances where it just doesn't make logical sense. So again, it's like, how much do you care about logic when you're kind of looking at this film? Do you just want to kind of watch a fun kind of schlocky kind of exploitation flick, or do you want to watch a film which is presenting a realistic kind of depiction of someone who is kind of losing their mind and becoming psychotic because of that? Because if it's the latter, then maybe you'll find problems with this film. And the other thing I would say, the last thing I would say, is there's some ropey editing in this film. There's some quite awkward cuts, and quite a lot of these cuts tend to be on the kill scenes. We don't really ever see like a point of impact. Quite often when she's attacking someone or someone's attacking someone, the camera kind of either cuts or it pans away, I'm assuming again this is probably a budgetary factor. We can't see the kind of like the knife going in, but I'm sure there would have been at least a couple of instances where they could have done that. Don't get me wrong, I actually got to say I think the practical effects are pretty good. When we do see like the practical effects, I got to say I thought they were of a good standard. It's just a shame that the vast majority of killing sequences, you never really see that kind of like that point of impact. It's always kind of like after the fact. And I guess the only thing I think again with the acting, no one ever seems to be in that much pain. When they're getting skewered one by the other, it's like a little kind of soft moan, but it's not really like, considering the things she does to them, there would be screams. So what do we think? It's a simple film. It's a very, very uncomplicated narrative, with a few kind of logic issues and a kind of little bit of ropey acting, but like I said, it's a kind of, it has a degree of originality behind it. I think the protagonist slash antagonist is quite an interesting kind of character. I think she has a great look. I like the fact we have slightly older kind of characters in this. It's not kind of like young teenagers and 20-year-olds and things. It's shot well. I think some of the gore effects are done well, and it just has this kind of like they say, this kind of like great kind of 70s kind of style vibe to it to a certain degree. So as long as you're going in knowing you're going to watch schlock, I would say it's a good time. It's a good time. So I will give this one a above average score of 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.